Hey everybody, welcome back to the stream. This is part two. So if you haven't seen part one yet and you're wondering what the hell's going on, you might want to look at my past videos and check it out. But basically what I am doing today is setting up a new decal layer that creators will be able to use for the Juice Goose. This is going to be separate from the existing texture set. It exists on top of it as an overlay and will make things a lot easier for creators to add their own custom graphics to the Goose. So, what we did in part one was basically set all of the UVs for these new meshes that have been added that are basically overlaid on top of the Goose. And what you're looking at right now is the Juice Goose package compiled with these new meshes as well as their texture added. So obviously the texture I've got right now isn't very pretty. Well, maybe some of you guys will find it pretty, but it's basically just a colored grid that I can use to help with my alignment and stuff. And some of you will notice that it's flickering. And I explained this a little bit in the first video, but this is something that I fully expected to see. And basically the flickering is there because these meshes exist exactly where the other ones are. And so the sim is having a hard time sort of knowing which one it should render, basically, is what's going on. So whenever you see this kind of flickering, it's because the coordinates of those two items are exactly in the same spot, and the sim is like, what do you want me to do? Which one do you want me to render? And it just keeps flickering from one to the other. So the simple solution to this, which I've actually done for the doors and the roof, which is why they're not flickering, is to move them out slightly. And so I'm going to make that modification to the 3D file. I will then rerun the package and see if the flickering goes away. Once the flickering is gone, I'll move on to other debugging tasks because there are some other things that will need to be modified as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to get started on those changes. So let's get my 3D editor open. We'll keep the sim running. And what I'm going to do is in my editor here, as I've already mentioned, I've already done this for the doors and I've done it for the roof. So what I want to do next is I want to grab the mesh for the main body decals. And the main body decals are going to be a little bit more complicated because as you can see here, I've already combined them all together. And so what I'm going to need to do is go into edit mode. Typically when I would do something like this as well is I would not have the other items displayed. And so what I'll do, just to make sure that they don't get in my way, I'm just going to hide a lot of them. I don't mind keeping, the main body there just because it helps me see what I'm doing essentially. But what I want to do next, and this is super important, is I want to grab those meshes. So maybe what I'll do actually, just to make this easier on myself, is I will hide everything I don't need to see. And that's just going to make it a lot easier for me to select the items I need to. So what I need to do here is I need to select the mesh elements and move them outwards. And I can't just do that to all of them at the same time because all of them have to move in a different direction. So there's this little neat trick in Blender where if you select the face of one of the items and you press the L key, it selects the rest of that mesh, as you can see there. And so if I continue to do that, so what I'm doing here is I'm holding my shift key. Oh, I just realized there that I'm going to want to adjust the UV for this top piece. So that's not a problem. I will do that as a separate step because I put it on the wrong one, essentially. That's what I'm trying to get at there. I'll explain that a little bit more when I fix it. So what I'm doing here is I'm holding shift, I'm selecting at least one face, and then pressing my L key. And as I do that, it selects all of the other faces that I need to work with. And this rear one, I think I need this. as well. This rear piece might be the trickiest one to work with, but I think it should be pretty good. I tried my best to make sure it was somewhat usable there from a texturing perspective, but you can see there, like there are some seams where the users will have to be careful when they create the texture for it, but shouldn't be too bad. So now that I've selected all the faces that I wanted to move out for this side, what I'll do is I'll go to my move tool here, and I can move it any amount of distance. The reason I didn't select my door is I've already done the door in the last video, in case some of you guys were wondering. So the distance that I decided to move these out was 0.001. And so I will maintain that distance. So everything moves out. And if I zoom into this piece, this will give you guys a good idea of just how small this is. Like, it's just a tiny amount, the tiniest of gap. Users won't see this when they look at Goose like in the sim, but that tiny gap is definitely going to help remove that flicker. And if I find that the gap is a little bit too much, I can always go back in and adjust it later. So this gives you a good idea of the size of the gap. So I will now do the same thing for the other side. So select the face, shift, select the face. Select the face. Okay, I think that about does it for this side. There may be some weird scenarios where I've missed a few, and then I can always come back. So here I will, once I've moved it, I can actually use the widget here in the bottom corner. I apologize if it's a little bit small for you guys. My 4K stream is getting changed up, so. Okay, so that side's been done. Now I will do the top layer. One thing I wanted to do before I do the top is fix these UVs. So you notice these sidebars. So here's what I was talking about. See how the texture is warping on these side pieces? That's because when I created the UVs, I didn't realize I had those meshes selected, right? So what I want to do is I want to actually make these UVs part of this top piece. So the way I'm going to fix that is I'm going to select all of them. So I'll take you guys along for the ride here. So I'm going to select all of these top faces like so. When you're sure as well, you can also just use the normal selection tool with your shift key. I'll be honest though, I'm more a fan of using the L method, because then you're certain you've selected the entire object. So whenever you use the L key, it's just literally going to select the remaining faces for that particular mesh object. And so here's what I want to do now. So here's the normal hood that I had before, and if I go into my UV editing tool, you can see that it's this hood piece that I had, right? So what I want to do to it is I want to actually go ahead and add these pieces here, these side pieces. The reason I want them on this top UV for the hood is because this way those textures will not be getting warped. So if I go to my top view here, you can now see that I'll have these two additional strips, right, that are actually visible as well. So they're good to have in here. And so now if I go into my project UV from view, you'll see that now my hood actually contains those two objects. So this changes my hood slightly in that it's now reoriented differently, and I think it's probably going to make more sense to actually keep it in this orientation as well. But I will adjust the scale to give it more breathing room. And I could even bleed it into the other one, but I don't think I'll need to. I think the current size is going to be pretty darn good for it. It's another thing I could do as well is I could remove these strips and move them elsewhere so that my hood has a little bit more room. And come to think of it, I did miss putting my hood piece in there, which I just realized now. So I'm going to use a little trick here to make sure that I get that hood piece in. So for those of you that remember, my hood piece was a separate mesh, and for good reason. And so I want to select them both together, so I'll have it. I'm now going to select just my hood so I can see where it's at, like this. Now what I do is I temporarily move them out of the UV set so that I can select them like this. Now that they're selected again, I go back into my projection view and say project from view. And the reason I want to do it this way is you see this gap here that I have for the windshield. I want to maintain that. Super important, because if you're a user creating a texture that is supposed to flow from the roof into this forward area, you want that gap to exist there, right? So that, like, imagine a snake, for example, and the head of the snake would be here and the tail, would flow outwards. You want that gap to be there, right? And so this way I will maintain it. And I hope a lot of this stuff is making sense to you guys, but if not, I certainly do apologize. So what I'm going to do here is adjust the scale slightly, because I don't want those pieces in the same plane as the side, essentially. Just going to make it easier for users when they're creating a texture for it. So I'm pretty happy with that. So now if I go back to this side view, you will see now that the mirrors, the side part and the top part, are now separate, right, in the UV slots. So they don't wrap around, and that's perfectly fine. Like, you're never going to get a scenario where they wrap around, and I'll tell you why that's important in this case is because if you look at the side view of the mirrors here, right, like if I'm creating a graphic, I can still make it wrap around by making sure that the graphic extends into this area here, but when I had it set up before, the whole thing was just stretching, right? Like I was literally getting a pixel or two being stretched across, which I wanted to try and avoid. And so this setup is going to look much nicer. And while I'm here, maybe I'll just take another quick look to make sure that there's no others. I don't see any others that really should be a problem. All of the other angles, are not stretching too much, so I'm happy with that. And this is another area where you can see where it's like I have UV sets that are part of the side group, and then I have others that are part of the rear group. And there's never a perfect way to get them all. There's always concessions that have to be made when you're creating this kind of a setup. So I have to decide, which ones make more sense on the side versus which ones make more sense on the rear, or so on. But I am pretty happy with what I've got there. So with that, I am going to switch back into my modeling mode. I can leave edit mode. And I think what was remaining, so I've moved the side of this mesh, I've moved the side of this one. I don't think I've done this front area yet. The roof is already done, so I don't need to worry about that one. But I do need to do this one now. So this is a separate issue from the one we just tackled. This is what we're doing right now, is we're just moving this entire mesh upwards, and this is going to solve our flickering issue, which you guys will see once I get the package remade. All right, so I think those are all of the mesh pieces. And so what I'll do is I'll just move them up, and then in here I will make sure that this is 0.001. Make sure that everything uses as clean a unit as possible in case I ever needed to undo it or something like that. Trust me, it is a hassle if ever you don't do that correctly. Okay, so these side pieces have been moved, great. And then lastly, I think this is the last one I really need to worry about, is I'm going to take this back piece here that you see here, and I'm going to move it back. Oh, this one as well. I'm going to move it back by 0.01 as well. All right, so I think that about covers it for the movement of the decals. What I'm going to do now is save real quick so I don't lose anything. And I'm going to unhide that is looking good. Got my floating decals there as well. Interesting. I have just discovered every now and then when you're working on something, you'll come up with this discovery. I know exactly what those are, and I'm clueless as to why they're over there. So for our wheel well lights, we have these little emission meshes, as you can see there. And it looks like at some point, some of them got moved all the way out here. So I am going to find out why. Just going to see if that's all of them. Yep, okay. This is one of the reasons when I'm setting up a file, I'm always super careful about having as many collections and layers as possible. Whenever you can, like it's always a good idea to make sure you do that, because this is what can happen otherwise. You accidentally select an item, and then the next thing you know, like it's way out in space or something like that. Now, obviously, for the case of this stream, like I'm doing this like a rough fix, right? But I'm going to go through the file and make sure that there's absolutely no chance of these guys actually being where they're not supposed to. But I will do that on my own at a later time. This is more of just a quick fix for this video. So what I'm doing here is I'm just making sure that these guys are where they're supposed to be. And then I'll come back later and double check. I'm pretty happy with that. As long as they're in the vicinity of this light bulb, that's fine with me. Okay, I will come back later and fix the remainder. Now let me just double check everything. All right. Let's save that again with that little fix put in. we're going to get our file exported. As you can see, it takes an awful long time to export this using the exporting tool. So it's modifying the file, the Blender file, in whatever way it needs to make sure that everything will be compatible with the Asobo's build tool, which uses GLTF spec. Okay, so now that it's exported, I can minimize this again. Let's go back into our flight sim. So by default, it is not using the newly exported one, so you're still seeing the flickering. I can show you guys the tool here. I don't know if you guys can see it on the screen. I believe so. Yeah, you guys can see it. Okay, so this is the project editor, and I've got our project open here. I will clear the logs, and basically because I've exported into the right path already, I just got to click on the build all button and pray to the Asobo gods that everything will export correctly. This build process can sometimes take a while, especially as your project nears completion, because we literally have everything when we're building out the project. It's one thing that I do hope they modify for the next version. It would be really nice if you could build out the project in separate pieces rather than like one entire build. Okay, so the project's been built out again. You can see I got kicked out of the hangar there. I'll re-enter my hangar, and if you look now, let's go to switch the camera. I'll get my controller turned on. Keep defaults fine. And you'll see now, obviously there are a few issues with the doors, but that's to be expected. That's actually because of the fact that the model that I'm running right now has the doors turned off, so I will need to add some logic in there to make sure that these decals disappear, which I'm actually going to do. Same with the roof, right? It's just basically the new decal that I have is not yet part of the roof texture, which it will be. So that's what actually I'm going to do next with you guys, but you'll see. But you'll notice that the flicker is now gone, and that's because I've moved those texture sets out just enough so that you couldn't see them. But as you can see here, they do not impede the ability of the default decals to show, which will be a nice addition. And of course, for those of you that don't want those default decals in there, you can of course go into that texture file and remove them separately. So they show there and there. Looks like everything is there. Now what we're going to do next is fix this issue here where you can actually see through the decals because they're not yet part of the meshes they need to be. So that should be a relatively painless addition. There are two ways to approach this. One, I could keep those meshes as separate objects and animate them, or like literally use the XML files in the sim to remove those as well. But if I do that, then I have the extra draw calls, required for those meshes, and I need to add the code, whatnot. What I could do instead is literally just attach them to the meshes that are already there. And it'll automatically, because those meshes are removed via name, it'll automatically remove those as well. And so that's what we're going to try next. So what I'm going to do is go back into my Blender file. I'll save what I've got so far because I'm happy with it. Save my backup. And so here's what I'm going to do. I am going to once again hide everything I don't need to work on. And so for those of you wondering why I do this, that little issue I had earlier with the wheel well lights, this is exactly why I like to do this. So if I don't need something visible when I'm working on another piece, I tend to like to remove it just in case that could happen. So now that I've done this, I'm going to add it to the mesh. Now, before I merge these to the mesh, though, I do have two other LODs that are going to need these new decals added to them as well. And so I have to consider that when I'm doing this work. What I'm thinking I'm probably going to do is add them to these meshes now and then redo those other LODs just for the parts that are going to be affected by it. And I think that's probably going to be the easiest approach. Alternatively, what I could do is keep them separate and then import all these new decals into those other LODs. But I think this other method is going to be better. So with that said, what I'm going to do is grab the new decals, and I can see here that that's exactly what I'm holding on to. And I am going to grab the door that I want it to be a part of. It's very important that the door is the second object I select. And then once you've done that, you just go into Object here and Join. And so what's happened now is that that decal that I've created is now part of the door. So if I run the animation, you can see that the decal is animating with the door because they're now one. So not only have I saved a draw call by doing that, but I'm also making sure that the animations and other things that are tied to that are now tied to the decal automatically. So I don't need to create an animation just for these new decals. So I'll test this one. Wonderful. The other benefit there is because our doors and our roof are removable, I'm going to get that for free as well. It'll automatically remove these decals when you remove them. And I think that's it. I think all of the others are part of, I guess technically I could attach these to the body as well, actually. That may not be a bad idea. I think that's pretty much everything else. I'm going to grab the main body and join them to the main body as well. So you can just do a quick test by grabbing it. You can see here that I have the main body mesh. These are items that are not animated and stuff like that. It's pretty static. And the new decals are a part of it. And there you go. I think that pretty much covers that. Now that I've done that, before I save my file, I tend to like to bring it into the sim and run a build just to make sure that everything is okay. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to export it again with all those parented. And so here's what I should see in the sim after this new export has completed. In the sim, because I've now parented those new decals to those original meshes, the doors and the roof will disappear because the logic for this particular vehicle that I have open says that the doors and the roof are not actually displayed, and so these new decals I have will disappear. So let's go back to the sim so I can better explain this. So you can see in the sim here that I have the roof and the doors showing, but it's not actually the roof and the doors, it's more the new decals I've created, right? And that's because they were not joined. They weren't attached to those meshes properly. And so now that I've done that and I'm re-exporting, there we go, it's been exported successfully. I'll go back into my tool here. I will build again. And with any luck, with this build, you will actually see that the roof and the doors will disappear because they're not being rendered. And then as a last sort of test, I'll actually open the Goose up in a map, and I'll physically like hide and show the doors and roof so that you guys can see what that looks like. And I'm probably going to make a Photoshop file as well that has a layer that shows the UVs, and that'll make it easier for you guys to create custom skins because you'll see exactly where the pieces go. So I'll probably create that file with you guys on stream today. It shouldn't take too long to create. Okay, so the build process has completed. I am going to go back, re-enter my hangar, and voila, there you go. So now you can see that the Goose has all the new custom decals laid out and with a nice sort of straight grid where you guys can be able to create graphics quite easily for it. And the doors and the roof are not shown. So let's go for a spin, shall we? I am going to I want to go to Bluffers Hill. Bluffers Hill is pretty cool, actually. I will go to Bluffers Hill. All right, any time now. Perfect. So here we are. We're in the sim. Got my trusty Xbox controller. And as you guys can see, all of the new decals are there. A few things that I do notice though that I'll tweak slightly. You can see that there's some flickering on the old decals. So I'll fix that the same way we fix these. I'll just move those out ever so slightly because it looks like they are close to these original ones. So that is not too big a problem. That's a pretty easy fix. But here it is. Here she is. And if I go into Goose here, let's go into the options, visuals. Oops. There we go. I'm going to want my doors and my roof displayed. And if I go into outside mode, you can see that those work. If I open my doors, the textures show correctly. All right, I am very happy with that. I just got to fix those other decals, and we should be golden. The other part of this stream, I guess I should say the last part, is probably going to be showing you guys how you can go in and modify those decals just for testing purposes and stuff. All right, let's get our Blender back open. So what I want to do here is go to my floating decals and I'll go into edit mode. I don't know if you guys can see this well or not, but I'm going to select the ones I just noticed something about these that I'm actually going to fix right now. I don't know if you guys can see this, but they're actually cubes. I don't know why I would have done this at the time, but they should definitely not be cubes. And so what I can do to fix that very easily is I've selected only the faces that really should matter in regards to that particular decal. And so what I'm going to do is go up to my selection tool here and say invert selection. Hit my X key and say delete faces. Okay, so that should be fine then. There were no faces for those other ones. So let's see what this does here. Oh, it's weird actually. Let's try that again. Oh, it's because I hit my L key. That's why. Okay. So just select the faces you want. Go up to select, invert, X key and then delete faces. So what that's going to do is it's going to remove all those other faces that I didn't actually want in there. Seeing some weird things here in regards to those floating decals that I want to double check. I should technically be able to see them right now. So see, they might have been on the wrong faces. So I'm going to test something out here. Oh, I think I might know exactly what that is. I'll explain it in a moment here. Um, so the way that Asobo handles decals is that it technically doesn't like to overlap sort of decals on top of one another. There's like an indexing system and stuff, and I'm not 100% sort of, privy on exactly what goes on there. But I think because I have a decal overlapping another decal, the sim isn't even quite sure like of how, I want to render those. And so I'll have to look into that a little bit to make sure that I'm doing that the correct way. And the other thing is, okay, the other decals disappeared because I actually accidentally deleted them when I used my inverse selection. Okay, so there we go. I just undo to bring them all back. So that gets rid of that problem. So what I'm going to do, at least temporarily for these, like these should definitely not exist as an entire mesh the way they do. So I will look at fixing that. But for the time being, what I want to do here is just move these up and out slightly. If I move them up by 0.001, that should make sure that they're overlaid on top of the other one. I will revisit that one in a second. Just going to do the other ones first. The other potential solution to this too would just be to get rid of those decals altogether and quite literally just uh, have them incorporated into this new decal set by default. So, I may end up going that route because honestly, like I don't see the point of now having these second ones, but I don't want to make that sort of update just yet. I'm going to give these guys a chance to exist separately. Because it's our Goose's branding. Wouldn't want the marketing guys to tell me that users keep overriding our branding now, would we? Okay, so I've moved them all out slightly. Now, the other thing that's important to note too is when you're working in Blender, you may sometimes see stuff that you do not see when you look in the sim. So for example, right now I don't see those decals, right? So before I start worrying about the fact that I don't see those, I'm going to export this and check in the sim to see what I see in the sim, because you cannot use these the Blender view sort of as a guide, right? It's never going to be 100% the same. Next, I have to do the door ones. So these ones might end up being a little bit trickier. We shall see, but I think it's these guys here. Yep, there it is. So these were the old sort of decal meshes. Yep, there you go. And so I'm going to grab this guy and move him out. I'm going to move him out by 0, 0, 1, 5. So like I said before, it might look like it's clipping through the other one in Blender. In fact, it looks really weird like that, but I'm not going to worry right now about what I see in Blender though, because Blender has a completely different way of rendering those than the sim does. So I'm not going to panic just yet. Zero, 0, 1, 5. Okay. So now that we've moved all those decals out, I am going to go back to my export tool, re-export them, and we'll run another test to see what we got. And like I mentioned, if these become a problem, the solution or the easiest fix will just be to get rid of them altogether, as we have the new decal texture anyways that we can just add them to. One important thing that I'll touch on as well when we get to creating these textures is that because these are overlaid on top of the existing textures, those of you wanting to make new skins for Goose are probably going to want to add in things like dirt and dust and stuff like that to make your Goose designs more realistic looking, right? And you'll have to add those on top of the decal, because otherwise you're just going to have this like really nice clean design on top of the existing textures, which may look a little bit weird for some of you guys. But ultimately, the choice will be you guys. Will be up to you guys. So if you want to have like a nice clean skin, the choice will be yours. All right, I'm going to open my project editor and hit build all. So basically what we're doing right now is we're running another test build with all of the existing floating decals moved out slightly, just to see if they show up. Hey guys, sorry about that. I had no microphone off for a while and didn't even realize it. Uh, so one of the realizations I made just recently was the fact that the original decals that make up Goose right now uh, have to be modified slightly, but it shouldn't be too big of a problem. Just need to make sure that I readjust the meshes that are being used for those. For whatever reason, there's a lot more faces on those original decals than there needs to be, so I'm going to clean those up slightly. But I'm reattaching the ones that I have as well. So this this basically explains the development process in a nutshell. It's like getting something out there, packaging it, and then finding these tiny little problems that you've got to go in and then find solutions for essentially. And that's okay. That's you know keeps you honest. So I'm just rejoining these to the door. Okay, so as soon as I do that, I notice that I lose that other decal. So uh, this one has been moved in. Moved out by 0.05. All right. So this time, before I attach those new decals to the door, I want to do a little bit of cleanup on the existing ones that had been already parented on it. So if I go into edit mode here, you'll see that there's this mesh overlaying the door. If you look closely, this one, this one here, actually grab that and move it. So as you can see, uh, for whatever reason, when it was made, it actually has sides which serve absolutely no purpose. And so what I want to do is essentially clean those off. And I'm going to do this for all of the existing ones because there's no point to having this information in here. It serves absolutely no purpose. It's the kind of complexity that just doesn't need to exist. And so, yeah, I'm going to clean it out. I'm going to leave it there for now. It's actually still parented to the door, so you can see there that it's still part of the door, but we'll fix that in a minute. I'm going to go to the other side and do the exact same thing. These are the kind of little things that you discover. Project is already released, and you're like, why the hell did I do that? Okay, so now that that's been done, I'm actually going to leave those decals where they are for the time being. And I'm going to recheck these new ones that I've added. So what I want to just make sure of here is that they are showing like on top of the door, but I want to make sure they don't look like they're floating, if you get my drift. So super important. Uh, so I am happy with that. I'm going to join those to the door. I'll come back on this side and do the exact same thing. So now what I'll do, I'm going to take a look at that floating decals material. I need to check the index on this one. So in the exporting tool, there's this draw order offset. And so basically the higher this number, the further out that decal will be, or not the further, I should say, like if your index is higher, the sim will draw it after the other ones. So in other words, if you have a decal that has an index of 0, it'll be drawn first. If you have a decal that has an index of 1, it'll be drawn after, etc. And so what I want to do here is I notice that these decals that we have an index set of 0. I'm going to move these out. I tend to not use just like integer numbers, so I'll just put it at like say 10. Because really there's nothing that should be drawn after these anyways. So that is applied to the material. Now keep in mind that the Blender has no idea what you're talking about when you're referring to draw order index, and so it doesn't really know what to do with that, which is fine. Okay. I'm just checking a few other things here, making sure that all of my items have their blend factors there. Blend factor is not important unless you have a texture map for stuff. Uh, just keep that in mind. Okay, that's looking better. I'm happy with that. Now what I'll do is take this original mesh that is actually already a part of the door, and I will move this closer, but what I want to do is make sure that you can see there that it starts to clip in. I want to make sure that it's fully outside and that there's no clipping whatsoever. So you don't need to get it perfect. I mean, I've seen plenty of vehicles in the sim where those, you know, they're clearly floating. I want to try to avoid that as much as possible. I don't want the users to see that they're actually not part of it, but at the same time, I want to make sure that they don't flicker. That's the most important part. And so get it far enough so that it's visible like that. All right. And now before we export this again, I'm going to fix those other ones as well that I had seen. And so I don't know if you guys recall, but this was another one that had all of those unneeded faces. There's a few tricks here that you can use to help you choose faces. Probably one of the easiest for me is just going to be to select that whole object, deselect the ones I don't want to remove, and then kill the others like that. So I'll do that first, and then I'm going to move. So I just want to make sure he's visible on top of everything else. I think that's good. We'll double check that later. And I'll do the same thing for this guy. So I'll select the entire decal, deselect the faces I actually want to keep, and then make sure that I'm able to see the whole thing. This guy's next. Okay, so far so good. All right, now that I've done that, I am going to make sure everything is visible again. Save my file so that I don't lose anything. And run another export test. I think one thing I might have forgotten to do here, but it's no big deal, is to reparent the top decal to the roof mesh, but I can just do that after the fact. It's no big deal. Okay, back into the sim we go for test number 3. So what we want to see here is our new decal set above the gooch, just like this, but we also want to see the old decals laid on top of it. So we'll see what we get. All right. Looking good so far. No flickering from what I can see. So we got the 42 decal, we got the Juice Goose on the side, the other one on the shot canister. We got the ones in the front. Showing. All right, let's get those doors open. Do a quick test of those. That looks good. That looks good. And here's where I think I may have forgotten it, but I'm going to get that roof removed to see if that one disappears. That's an easy fix though if we need to. All right. Yes. Okay, I figured. So that one still needs to be parented, but that is a super easy fix. Let's go back into our editing tool. So all we've got to do for this one is reselect that. get it joined with our roof. Okay, so there is another step that I'm going to do before I do another test. And this is super important. So maybe I'll spend a little bit of time explaining why these are important as well. Currently in this test file that I have, in this new decal that I have, if I go into my material slots here for it, which I've called full panel decals, this is the name of the material. This is a decal material, but for testing purposes, I had only added the albedo. The albedo of a texture is the color, which is this grid that you see here. But when you're creating decal sets, most of you are probably going to want to do a little bit extra, right? You're not just going to want to put in color. You may actually want to be able to affect the material properties themselves. Just to give you a little idea of what those properties are, you have occlusion, which is whether or not you see the decal. You can do that with a PNG, like by using transparency and stuff, but trust me, it's not ideal. Really what you want to do is use the occlusion property, which is mapped to the red color of the other texture. Then you have roughness, and roughness is whether or not your material will look shiny in the sim. So a white for roughness is going to be sort of rough looking, right? Whereas a black color for the roughness channel will be more shiny, like metals and stuff. Or not, I shouldn't use metals, but it's going to be more reflective, like a shiny surface would. And then finally, you've got metallic, which is going to affect the way the material works, like under light and stuff. And so I'm not going to go into super detail in terms of how those get all, mapped out in the texture and stuff. What I would recommend though is go online and look up how to create, materials for Microsoft Flight Sim and stuff, and you'll actually see. But you'll also be able to just look at the default one that we provide and maybe glean some information there. What I want to eventually be able to do is provide you guys with a Photoshop file that'll have all of those layers broken out. Uh, and of course, please reach out to us in our Discord channel as well. And we'll be more than happy to assist you guys, right? The goal here is going to be to educate a few people in the community, and then you guys can help each other out and stuff like that. But and then finally, you have normal and emissive. So what are those? Well, the normal map is a special type of map that's going to make it look like that surface has bumps in it. Like basically it makes things look like they're protruding and stuff, right? Really cool. You guys have probably seen this in other vehicles as well. When you look at materials and stuff, like leather is going to look like leather, and so anything that is really small, like details that are small and you wouldn't be able to model, you would handle those by using a bump map. And then lastly is the emission texture, the emissive texture. The emissive texture is basically a texture that allows you to make it look like things are glowing in the sim. And so I'm actually going to create default maps for all of those. And what that's going to mean is that if you want to create a skin for Goose that is glowing, you'll totally be able to do it just by adding or modifying that texture. And so I'm going to go ahead and create those now. I'm going to bring them into the model and map them, and then we can do some tests and you guys will be able to see. So I'm going to get my Photoshop open here. Hopefully you guys can see. Minimize these two folders because we don't need it. And what I'm going to do here is open up I might be able to do a test for you guys just to give you an idea of what changing these textures actually does. I think it might be useful for some of you guys as well. Uh, Maybe what we'll do is we'll use this one by default. So what you're looking at right now is currently is the albedo texture that I have mapped to that new decal. And we could totally just do the decals like this, right? And you would see them on the screen and it would look, 90% good. But let's say you wanted to add dirt or dust to your goose, right? And you wanted to really make the texture look polished the same way like any other professional vehicle would. Then you would need to add those other ones in, like the normal and the roughness and metallicness, stuff like that. You can't make a texture look nice without those, like if you want to make it look super polished. And so that's why I want to map those and make them available to you guys. And by default, they will just be like an empty PNG file, uh, but you guys will be able to go in there and put whatever you want for them. So I am going to simply go up here and save a copy of this. And what I'll do is I'll just rename them over here. So now I have my albedo. I'll create another one called decals underscore norm. And this one will basically be my normal map. So just so you guys get an idea of what normal maps normally look like. See all these purple ones here in our texture set? All of those purple ones that you see, those are normal maps. And so basically what they do is they tell the sim that when it's looking at a particular part of a surface to basically tell the light to make it look like that surface is protruding outwards or inwards, essentially. The other ones you see here that look sort of orange and green, these are the comp file. The comp file is the one that I was showing you where it has actually 3 channels, but all of them are mapped to different things. You have your occlusion, you have your metallicness and roughness. Those are the comp files. And that's why they look sort of weird looking here, right? It's because every channel is mapped to something different. And so when you look at that file, it's going to look really weird. Like you're going to be like, what? I don't even see that texture. And it's not meant to work that way. That's why. Hopefully that makes sense, but it may not. And if it doesn't make sense to you guys, that's okay. Okay, then we have our emissive one. So obviously, I'm just creating a bunch of copies right now of this grid, for testing purposes. That it's not going to make much sense when we look at it in the sim, but you'll understand in a moment. It's basically just so that in the 3D file that they're actually mapped to a texture. That's the important bit. And so, what's the one I'm missing? Oh yes, the comp file. Our wonderful comp file. The comp file is in some ways the most important texture. It's kind of weird that to say that, but it's in some ways the most important texture in your texture set because it's really the one that gives that texture, a lot of life in the sim. And I'll show you guys what I mean when we look at the goose in the sim itself. You'll see what I mean there. Okay, so now that I have all those, and right now they're using the grid for all of them, which is going to look really weird, but you'll see what I mean when I map it. So let's zoom in here for a second. If I go down in here in my material, see how I don't have any maps for these, right? So I'm actually going to open this up. And I'm going to go into my texture maps folder. And this is super important. You got to make sure that you map it to the correct one. So I think I chose my comp file next. So I'm going to choose my comp and add it in there. So when I see this occlusion, roughness, and metallic, I know that that's referring to my comp file. And immediately you can see here how the texture was changed. Okay. If you don't have something mapped in there, it automatically looks in behind. It looks to the next texture it can find for that information. And so when I didn't have anything for my comp, it was automatically looking for the comp that that it had in the other one. That's what that blend mode does that you saw earlier. So if you have a blend, a full blend, it's actually going to look back and use the first comp it can find. So super important to know how that works. Next, I have my normal. This is when it's really going to look weird because what I'm about to assign here is not a normal map by any stretch of the imagination. So it's going to look super weird. Uh, as you can see there, right? Like it has no clue how to deal with the normal map I've just provided it, but that's fine. We'll change that texture in a minute. And then finally, I have my emissive map. And so this one's going to look kind of cool in the sim. You'll see, like I'll throw it on there at night, and you will see the texture will actually glow, which is kind of cool. For the emissive as well, we have this option to make sure that emissive does not work during the day, but it's not available. Day-night cycle right here. It's not available to decals for one reason or another. I don't know why Soba did this. It would have been kind of cool, but I think that's fine. Most people are not even going to use the emissive texture anyways, so I'm not too concerned with that. But what we're going to do now that we have that's added in here is we're going to re-export our file. And so like I've already mentioned, is when you guys look at the new Goose package and you guys look at these textures, every single one of them is going to be a transparent PNG file. And the reason for that is because in the default base version of the Goose, we're not going to have anything in these textures. We're creating these purely for you guys, purely for the creators out there that want to modify Goose. And so when you guys look at these textures in the base version of Goose, they will just be transparent PNG files, which you guys will then be able to open in your any editor of your choice, populate it with content, and then play around with the resulting design in the sim. So there you go. That's basically something I wanted to make sure that you guys all understood. So now that I've done that, let's go back to our sim. We're going to run another build. We're going to retest that roof because we want to make sure that's working correctly. And then I'm going to show you guys what the addition of those new textures will do for us. All right. So build is completed. As you can see, it looks quite a bit different now that we have those additional textures added. Kind of interesting effect with the metallicness and stuff. And yeah, so basically what you're seeing there is just a result of me having textures added there that look a little bit weird, essentially, right? But from what I can see, everything looks good. Now let's take a look at the emission that I was talking about. So one thing you guys will notice is that you do not see the emission of the Goose right now, right? But yet I added a texture to it. So the reason for that is because in my model, I have the emission set to black, but the blend mode is 100%. That map is being blended with the emissive setting that I have in the actual material. So I'll show you guys that right now, and you'll see the effect of when I change it. So if I look in my texture, you will see that I've added an emission map in there, and we know that it's got color and settings, right? And so why am I not seeing that emissive effect? Well, if I scroll up here to my base properties, you'll notice that my emissive color is set to black. So basically what I'm doing is I'm telling the sim, I don't want emission on here. right? Like I don't want this texture to be emissive. And maybe that's the case most of the time, right? But in this case, I want it to use my map. So it's super important that I set my emission here to white. So this is going to set my emission on. And at this point, because I have my blend set to 1 over here in my settings, it will use my emission map. And so now that I've done that, I'm going to go back and re-export this file. This is something I should have thought of before I exported the first time, but it's sort of serendipitous that it happened because a lot of people run into this problem and then have no clue as to why they're not seeing their emission. But now that I've set that emission to white and I have a map assigned to it, we should see the texture set start to glow at night. So here's hoping. So developing vehicles in Microsoft Flight Sim is a lot of this. It's a lot of waiting. All right, here we go. And now, of course, we need to rebuild. I've just kicked off a new build. Some of you guys have probably noticed that the headlights sort of have like a bluish and a warm glow to them. So the way I achieve that is I basically have more than one light emitter there. That way I can have more colors in the light node itself. So it's actually like a neat little effect that we were able to create just by having more than one light emitter. Okay, so now they're glowing. Take a look at the buggy now. That is pretty sick looking. I don't know about you guys, but I think I'm going to be rocking a glowing goose skin. The other thing that I like about it as well is that because the other decals, the ones that are overlaid on top of it, do not have emission, you will see the 42 logos in black, which is really cool. Yeah, I definitely like that. That's nice. I think a lot of people are going to appreciate having access to that. Let's go turn on our roof so that we can make sure that that guy shows up as well. Nice. All right, so I think that about does it for the addition of these new decals. I mean, that pretty much covers everything that I wanted them to have in terms of functionality. The other thing I like about it as well is that because they are technically decals, uh, there are gaps in between the panels, the same way you would have, like, say, on more complex, like police, decals that they have. Like I'm thinking like European police cars and stuff, right? When they don't actually want to get those decals like into the panels and stuff, so they cut them short. And I think it ends up having like a really cool appearance, which I actually kind of like. So, and obviously there are other advantages as well by keeping those mesh objects a lot simpler than they would have otherwise had to be. And so you have that advantage as well. And yeah, so the next step is basically just going to be to create a Photoshop file that is going to basically facilitate the creation of these skins for you. And so what that Photoshop file is going to have is a base layer that will just be like what the UV set looks like. Just to give you guys an example of that again, if I go back to our 3D editor and we go back to our UV editing mode. So in the UV editor, you have this sort of look right at the original mesh and stuff. And so it's going to be hard for me to show it now because obviously I've already parented all of these meshes, right? But I'll go back into a previous save, and what I'll do is I'll export a file. So in the Photoshop file that you guys will be given, it'll be a white layer, and it'll have all of the meshes for the new decals laid out on it in a black outline. And it'll just be there as a layer, so you guys will know exactly what you're looking at when you create those textures. And yeah, so I'm not going to include the creation of that in this video just because I feel like I've already been made it long enough, but hopefully you guys have enjoyed this little look into the creation process of Juice Goose. And I look forward to doing more of these with you guys. So if there's anything specific that you guys would like to know about the creation of a vehicle in the flight sim, please let me know. And if there's enough interest in one, I'll make another video to showcase that part of it. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. And I know you guys hear this a lot, but take a second to like the video, place a comment, subscribe, like all that stuff means the world to me, and it really helps me get an idea of how useful these videos are and stuff. So yeah, hope to see you guys in the next one, and peace. Take care.